Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, and welcome back to another episode of my F1 22 My Team Career Mode. This is episode number 17 today for this Singapore Grand Prix in Season 1. If you guys did miss the previous one at the Italian Grand Prix, then be sure to go check that one out before you see this one, because we tried 0-0 wings for the very first time, and we had a pretty massive moment in that race where the car may have been spinning the wrong way around, narrowly missing out on a DNF and going on to have a very tricky Italian Grand Prix, but a chaotic one nonetheless, and an action-packed one for everyone down the field. But there was something in the coding around that circuit. The AI was so bloody punchy with us, and we, got put into the grass and gravel quite a few times. But in the end of it, we did manage to scrounge some points, and we continue to just about maintain P7 in the constructors, and we add another P7 to our race results. The renewal for our sponsors has come up though, so we can now choose some different ones. So the car is obviously in a better place than when we chose our very first sponsor, so we're actually going to change it up a little bit. We're going to go with Lupo Industries again, but then also go with a different sponsor, which is just scoring one Constructors' Championship point during a race weekend, the other obviously being finishing inside the top 10. So basically, as long as we get P10 and above, we're going to complete both objectives and get a decent amount of cash compared to the first sponsor we ever got, which was a top 14 finish. And I think, now we'd be disappointed if we finish outside the top 10. I know we had that very difficult race at the French Grand Prix, the DNF at Belgium, but barring those ones, we have been aiming and getting into the top 10. And as I said, being quite consistent with those P7s for our number 7 on the car. Upgrades-wise, of course, we're waiting for those two major air updates to the front and rear, and the rear downforce one that was meant to be coming in earlier has failed. So it's actually a good thing that we're saving R&D points, because we need to rebuy this, but I'm going to wait and hold off on that just yet, because you can see there's quite a lot of time if we rebought it to the next Grand Prix it would come in for, which is the US Grand Prix. So you may as well just hold station, earn more R&D with the practice programs going into this race weekend, because I just want to wait to confirm what is being reset in the regulation change. Then we'll adapt those parts. Then we'll think about rebuying that rear downforce upgrade. So for now, we're still waiting on the front downforce upgrade, and we've got a failed rear one. And we are slipping a little bit in the R&D chart. I think I saw there. We slipped back down one position behind AlphaTauri again. But going into this episode, I think Singapore, it could be an okay one for us, I mean, generally speaking, you don't need heaps ton of straight line speed around here. It is a bit of a compromising circuit, but it is a street circuit, so ultimately you do want to run the wings a bit higher and get some downforce, and our car has been pretty damn nifty in the corners, actually. If you look back at races like Miami, where we were struggling for that, straight line speed, but in Sector 1, we were flying. Monaco, we did quite well around there, even in the wet, and I mentioned that because I think there may even be some rain on the way for Sunday, which is really unfortunate. I mean, the longest race on the entire calendar, and we're going to make it even longer for myself recording it. I mean, you guys, it doesn't matter. You guys get the edited down highlights version, but I'm going to have to sit through an even longer Singapore Grand Prix potentially if the rain does fall. But let's see if we can extend our time on the Saturday here and get through into Q2. At the moment, P17, bit of oversteer hampering us in the last sector, losing us a bit of time. Ultimately, through the final bend, we gain half a second on that second flyer to match Felipe Drogovic for P13 and 14. But we are a little bit slower than we were at Monza, of course. That was to be expected, but we are still in the mixer in the midfield. But Aston Martin, very 2x2 actually. Aston Martin's both ahead of us, then McLaren's just outside, on the edge of getting into the top 10. So that's always a bit of a threat for us in terms of the constructors. But good to beat both Alfa Romeo cars actually, and both Hasses. We know track-to-track dependency matters a lot there. So yeah, clearly our car is working pretty decently, but obviously I don't think we're going to be as good as we were maybe at Monza. But let's see, could we get into the last 10? We didn't manage it in Monza, Drogovic did, so will one of us manage it this time round, and if we do, I'll be very, very happy with that then, because such contrasting circuits and some consistency of getting through. But I think, going through the last bend, we've been struggling a little bit versus Drogovic. I think in the final sector, he's got a bit more time there. I'm just finding it difficult to kind of dance the car around the last sector. First sector is pretty okay, well matched. I think second sector, the same again, but we do gain about a 10th there, just on the entry and exit alone of that right-hander. But then into the final sector, we pretty much carried that 10th through, but we're not gained too much. Bit of time there on the left-hand side as we took a little bit less curb, and that might be also an issue. Maybe I'm taking too much curb and using the same lines as we did in F1 2021. Across the line then, we do gain a decent amount of time to actually beat Drogovic this time, but our car, alas, does not quite have the same pace as it did around Italy. But again, we get out-qualified by Albon in the Williams car, who just keeps on doing an amazing job in a car that's slower than us. So fair plays to him. But we do beat the likes of Fernando Alonso in the Alpine, which is, I mean, both Alpines we've actually beaten today on Saturday, which is very surprising. But the McLarens, well, Ricciardo is fastest of all in Q2, so that's a bit worrying. So let's go to the grid then, and well, let's pray McLaren don't have that kind of lightning pace in Q3. Otherwise, this really might be the nail in the coffin that sees us go behind them for the first time in the Constructors.
Against the spectacular backdrop of the Singapore skyline, Formula One returns once again to do battle in what tends to become something of an endurance race, with the notorious sauna-like temperatures in the cockpit making for an extremely physically challenging race. We have a high risk of a safety car here today, I think, as the abundance of tight corners mixed with these wet conditions could put a few cars off and into the barriers. 23 turns then, 13 to the left and 10 to the right make up the 3.1 mile lap of Marina Bay. It's time to take a look at our starting grid for today's race. Lewis Hamilton lines up on pole position, and Max Verstappen lines up alongside. Looking at the rest of today's grid, we have Russell, Leclerc, Carlos Sainz and Norris, Perez, Ricciardo, Bottas and Mick Schumacher. The owner driver, Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll and Vettel. They'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty. Albon, Joe, Yuki Tsunoda, they've taken a grid penalty, and Esteban Ocon. Drogovic, Gasly, Latifi and Kevin Magnussen fills the last spot on the grid. It's almost time for the lights to go out, so let's head down to the track where preparations are underway.
Well, the rain is very much here. It is heavy rain to start off this Singapore Grand Prix. This is going to be a little bit of a long race. For me, not for you guys. For me, though, it's going to be quite long, and it may be quite painful because, I mean, the last time we had a massively wet race was Australia, I think, and, you know, back then we kind of made the mistake of going quite low on the wings. You know, here around Singapore, I compromised and did run higher wings anyway in quali, not because of the rain on the way in the race, just because I thought it would add some performance. So I think we should be okay and definitely feeling a bit better around here at the start of this race than we were maybe back in Australia. And we've had a few wet sessions before, obviously, in between those two races, since that kind of, you know, what was it, that third episode so early on in the career mode, and we've been fine now. So the car's in a better position for the wet weather racing, but still, it's just not what you want really in a car that's in the lower half of the performance chart. You know, it's going to be a very tricky Grand Prix. Steady right foot needed and concentration at the maximum. The McLarens qualify decently. We can see both of them ahead of us though, so it's not a disaster. There maybe is a chance we can try and attack them, but again, we're going to be hoping for a bit of a chaotic race. I think it may get dry to the end, so let's hope that maybe in the pit stop windows or whatever the case, changeable conditions, we can maybe make something of this Grand Prix and go forwards rather than backwards. And of course, you may notice we are actually going to line up in P11 due to some engine penalties, so we are going to be higher up the grid than when we actually qualified, so that's at least an added bonus at the start this Grand Prix. Our teammate Felipe Drogovic, though, being one of those drivers that faced a penalty, so he's even further back. So it really is going to be, once again, up to me to try and take the challenge to McLaren and trying to get some points for this team as we go to 5 red lights then for this Singapore Grand Prix under heavy rain. Lights out, and away we go from P11 on the grid. Very shaky start. It's actually a good getaway and launch in the later gears, but into turn 1, just hesitant to make a dive, unlike Mick Schumacher, who makes it 3 wide with Sergio Perez and Ricciardo. We managed to just fend off Lance Stroll and Vettel either side of us to maintain where we qualified, or were on the grid, I should say. But now, Bottas with a bit of an iffy rear end, and we go from right to left, switch it to the racing line, and get round the outside of the Alfa Romeo car up into the top 10. Schumacher, though, that dive for him didn't quite work out as the two Ferraris are close. Leclerc and Carlos Sainz as they chase after Verstappen and both Mercedes cars who qualified well. Hamilton again on another pole position, showing the Silver Arrow really is a great car now at this point of season 1 as we tuck in behind Schumacher, and this now may be a long road ahead of us until it starts drying out and goes to at least intermediates, I would say, because yeah, it's very, very tough out there, tiptoeing around. This was the start then for Leclerc from P4 on the grid. Hamilton on pole, his rival Verstappen right ahead of him. It was a slower start for him versus the cars ahead. Hamilton actually cut across Verstappen to defend P1. Verstappen then loses out, it would seem, maybe to George Russell. Sainz goes around the outside of Leclerc, so Leclerc almost gets done by his teammate, but I believe on the exit, I think Leclerc should hold this through. Russell has a real good go at Verstappen further up the road. You can see he does tuck in, so it's all the same for the top 3, and then the two Ferraris squabble, and eventually it filters out to literally how they lined up on the grid, with Hamilton from Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, Sainz, Lando with a bit of a iffy rear end through that right-hander, just showing how wet and damp it is out there, as corners that aren't usually really that challenging and are flat out in the dry become proper corners to lift off for in these conditions, and it's going to be tough for anyone to make moves, but let's see how the AI do. Let's see how we do. Well, back to our POV, lap 3. We are struggling, but we've got a change of strategy, and our engineer has told us it's time to come in for intermediates. I couldn't tell it was time because it still looks so wet out there, but no wonder I was struggling. 2.5 seconds we lost to Mick Schumacher and the kind of whole gaggle of cars up ahead, and I've noticed that although I feel like versus the AI, the player maybe has an advantage when it's kind of damp conditions, slick tyre to inters. When it's wet tyres to inters, the AI, they've still got that robotic-like nature just to drive really, really well, even when the full wet tyres stop working and you need to switch over to inter. So that's why we lost so much time there. No wonder. It's time to go onto the green tyres. Everyone is in. We're going to lose a bit of time there, and a lot of time, actually, because Lance Stroll overtakes us. Bottas re-overtakes us there. So that's an annoying, frustrating pit stop. One we had to make, really, because the alternative was just struggling more and more on the full wet tyres, which a couple of drivers have chosen to do on the sharp end there. Mainly the two Mercedes cars have both stayed out, along with Leclerc, whereas Verstappen has come in, but they're in much better cars to make that risk. I had to come in because I was losing too much time anyway to Schumacher, but we've lost 2 positions then, with Bottas and Stroll being held up in the pits, so not ideal, but it's just the way it went. And like I alluded to, Lewis Hamilton and Russell both staying out on the full wet tyres. Hamilton is in. Russell continues on for one more lap, so the two Mercs not wanting to double stack. Leclerc is finally in, along with Lando Norris, Fernando Alonso, Drogovic still yet to come in, but we move down the ladder on the left-hand side. P10 you'll spot there is Verstappen, and he is already on the intermediates. Now let's see what the gap is. Has he overtaken Hamilton? Has this been a gamble that Mercedes have got wrong, or have they just pin perfectly got it correct? Maybe they were just quick enough on the full wets to still be ahead of Verstappen and Red Bull into turn 1. Verstappen goes, whereas Hamilton, he's already passed. He's still there in what will be a net P1 once Russell pits. So yeah, Merc still have the overriding pace to make that work, and Leclerc did as well, because Leclerc stays ahead of his teammate. So even inter-team, Leclerc just had more pace, I guess, in the car versus Sainz to make that work, as we narrowly get ahead of Guan Yu Zhou there in the other Alfa Romeo, just showing you how much time we've actually lost, because we're actually behind Alonso now. We were ahead of him before, and we're actually not too far away from our teammate Drogovic. So in the end of it, we actually got screwed over in that pit stop quite a bit. Maybe we could have made it work on the full wets. I don't know. It makes me think now, but I don't know. It's just a double-edged sword for us, because we just don't have a car that's quick enough, whereas the Mercs do. As Hamilton comes around the bend now onto a new lap, Russell has finally come in now for the intermediate. Still looks pretty damn wet out there, though, I must say, in parts of the circuit, but Verstappen comes through into P2. Russell, though, v Leclerc. This is going to be close. Will Russell? Yes, he will. Russell will be overtaken. So actually, Mercedes, they may have got the right call with Hamilton, but George needed to come in on that same lap as Hamilton because he's lost out to Leclerc then. So Leclerc up into a podium position then. So that's good news for him and Ferrari versus Verstappen, his nearest championship rival, of course. But that's unfortunate for Mercedes, and Russell gets the second pick there and loses one spot to the Ferrari. Then behind them, Sainz, Lando Norris, Sergio Perez, Daniel Ricciardo. Oh, Ricciardo! Ricciardo's locked up in these tricky conditions, and he's out of the Singapore Grand Prix. He's slammed straight into the wall just before where the Singapore sling used to be before when they changed the circuit, and it's a much higher speed corner now because you want to chuck the car in so quickly through that left-hander rather than braking quite a lot for the sling that used to be there. And so Ricciardo locked up and just went straight on into the wall. Safety car is out, and safety car is coming in now on lap 11, 2 laps later. But my engineer, you may have just seen there, just indicated strategy change to the dry tyres. It looks quite wet in that sector, but last sector is quite dry. You've got the Ferrari of Sainz staying out though on the Inters, a couple of cars on the right hand side staying out, but we come in along with so many people as we go green. A very fascinating race this is already turning into be, because we go green and go racing again, and immediately half the grid come in for the dry tyres. We're going to go into the hard compound to the end of the Grand Prix. This will be optimal turn-in, but there are so many cars behind us. As we pop on the hard tyres, we get held up. We already get overtaken by quite a few, and it's going to be a painful sitting here as we just wave some cars by that we didn't even wave by in the first pit stop. So now we're behind both Aston Martins of Vettel and Stroll. We're behind Ocon now as well, Tsunoda in there, and we're now down to 18th place. Of course, there are still some cars yet to make a pit stop, Drogovic, our teammate, being one of them, and Sainz as well in the Ferrari, Fernando Alonso in there as well, but Verstappen is the lead. Well, Verstappen's the lead man now. He's the lead man. Look at the ladder. He's P5 and Hamilton is in P7. So in all of that pit stop chaos for me, other people also got affected, mainly Lewis Hamilton there, as he loses the net lead. Where is Sainz going to filter in? All we can guarantee is Verstappen now takes the race lead of the Singapore Grand Prix. What a pit stop sequence for them. Sainz is out behind Bottas. Bottas is into P2 in the Alfa Romeo. And now these two are side by side. Hamilton on more warmed up hard tyres. Sainz on cold medium tyres. So Sainz going a lap longer on the Inters has allowed Ferrari to gamble on the medium compounder tyre. And it's worked for them because Sainz in all of that not only is on the mediums now and has re-overtaken Hamilton straight away, he's ahead of Leclerc. Leclerc went earlier onto the hards and he's actually come out behind Sainz, who stayed out on Inters. Fascinating. For some people, it was quicker to stay out both pit stops, and for some people it was slower. And so Verstappen leads the way from Bottas of all people in the Alfa Romeo. Sainz in third. He's trying to get Bottas as he pressurizes him, and the Finn locks up. Bottas locks up, comes back on track, and he hits Hamilton. He's hit Hamilton. The two former teammates have made contact, and I think that may be Lewis with some damage, you know. I don't think there's damage to Bottas. Ironically, it's the Mercedes who actually comes off the worst, being the one who got crashed into. And yep, Hamilton has no end plate, so he's gone from leading this Grand Prix, dominating it in the first part of this race when it was wet, to now he's third place, and he's now going to pit again for damage. So that's horrendous for Hamilton, and the both pit stop phases have changed this entire race. So much chaos, the people gaining losing time by going, you know, for the undercut or the overcut, and seemingly also just the actual pit lane itself, you know, messing with people, having to wait to be released from your pit box. Meanwhile, back to our POV in our world, lap 14, and we're looking to overtake Vettel and the Aston Martins. We try and climb back up the order. P17, that is, but it's a very long way from where we were. I mean, it's quite depressing, actually. We were fighting for at least P10 before, and now we're fighting for P15 here with Ocon. This is quite annoying. Our teammate is up the road, though, and he's been holding up Ocon a little bit in dirty air. So can we get the Alpine, who's looking a bit vulnerable, you know, for some reason, not looking too great behind our teammate Drogovic. Maybe the dirty air not helping him out as we now open DRS. He's got it as well, but we are going to try and go around the outside. It's very close to the wall, though, and Ocon, to be fair to him, places his car literally inch perfect there. Just narrowly stopped me from going on the outside. because if I committed to that, I would have been in the wall pretty much. So now we have to go again for the second time now on the outside. This time Ocon does leave us a bit more room, and we're able to pounce around the outside, just about keep the car within the confines of the circuit to get up into P15 on lap 17. So still a long way to go in this Grand Prix, and we chase after our teammate Drogovic now. Ahead of us, Russell getting tucked up behind Alonso, and Magnussen with an engine failure now. The Haas in P12 with an engine failure. He holds up Russell. He holds up Russell. We narrowly just avoid making race-ending contact with the Silver Arrow, because Russell was pulling out from underneath Magnussen's wing as he DNF'd, and he almost just drove straight into me trying to go down the inside. We now squeeze him into turn 1. He's on the inside, but we've got the better racing line. His line's compromised, and we maintain position against one of the Silver Arrows. And now I want to try and use Drogovic to pull me along with DRS to try and stay ahead if we can, because we've got Russell, we got a free position of Magnussen, and so all of a sudden now we're up into P13, Drogovic P12, and could we go on to do more maybe? We can get maybe Drogovic later in this race. Lap 22, that later is going to be 2 laps later this is, as we go through on the left-hand side. Pretty easy move with DRS. He does fight us a little bit on the exit, but in the end we will get that. And now I've got to hope that Drogovic can hold up Russell and save me from some headache later on in the race. 5 laps later this is, we're catching up to Fernando Alonso and Tsunoda. Again, an Alpine being held up by a car ahead, because Tsunoda is definitely slower than Alonso can go, and Tsunoda, the AlphaTauri team, are slower than us, so that's why we've been able to catch them actually 5 laps later, and we're going to use this opportunity to get Alonso before he has a chance to get in clean air, because I know once he gets in clean air, that Alpine is going to be quicker. So we get Fernando on the inside, and now we'll look to get Tsunoda, and we will be up into 1 points paying position. We've been digging deep this entire race. We've really had to work for it, but this is going to be at least 1 championship point. Meanwhile, behind us, Hamilton's climbed back up into P13, but I think he's had to overtake Russell, who, by the way, has still been stuck behind Drogovic. So fair play to Felipe, our teammate, as we overtake Yuki now on the inside. Very close, having to kind of push our elbow out a little bit, because Tsunoda was really squeezing us to that wall and apex. You know, kudos to Felipe Drogovic. He's actually held up legitimately Russell this entire race, and is still doing so. Russell actually went down the order after another pit stop, so Drogovic actually stays ahead of the Merc as we now cut on to the last lap of the Grand Prix. So this race has flown by, because I'm not going to lie, not a lot happened at the sharp end with the kind of top, I would say, top 9 all staying put really. Max Verstappen will win this Singapore Grand Prix in quite a chaotic fashion there, all thanks to the pit stops. You know, Red Bull kept their heads calm, Verstappen kept his head calm, and he got through into P1. Mercedes will feel cheated a little bit. They've had a lot of bad luck this race. They should have been there on for a double podium maybe, but instead they're both not going to score any points. Sainz though in second place, from Bottas in third in the Alfa Romeo. Leclerc will finish P4. Lando Norris, the McLaren, in P5. So that's going to be a decent amount of points for McLaren to gain on us in the Constructors. We are going to get 1 measly point to limit the damage. We get beaten by Albon in the Williams of all people. So again, it's a really good result for Williams and Albon. A terrific drive for him in a very slow car. And, you know, that really just shows how unlucky we got in that horrendous second pit stop. The fact that we finished behind the Williams in this race. But, I mean, I guess a lot of people got screwed over in the pit stops, mainly Mercedes as well. What a roller coaster. What a day for Alfa Romeo. Guan Yu Zhou and Bottas both in the points. And Bottas on the podium. Insane.
They've endured the harsh conditions here in Singapore then to pull off a spectacular victory. So, Natalie, what do you think helped them deliver this result?
I think that smart tyre management on track and very smooth driving definitely assisted in their victory today. That combination meant they got the absolute maximum out of their tyres at all times.
Here come today's winners. The team at Red Bull have done a phenomenal job recently. It's clear to see that they've put in the work and they should be proud of the victory they've secured here.
So they just keep exchanging blows, it would seem. So just like in real life, really, it is going to, I think, end up being Verstappen versus Leclerc for this championship. You know, at one point, you know, there were other drivers in this science, both Mercedes drivers, and even though Mercedes keep qualifying well and they're getting race wins, I mean, Hamilton literally just won the last race, the consistency of Verstappen and Leclerc just being there, kind of in the top 6 zone every race, has meant the whole season, and they keep obviously winning races, the pair of them, mean that it just ultimately is still all about those two, despite Merck trying to steal the show and get involved. Verstappen back ahead of Leclerc in the Drivers' Championship by 2 points. You can see what I mean, 29 points now. You know, at one point, there was only like, you know, I think 15 points covering like top 4, top 5 drivers, I think a couple episodes ago, but now Verstappen and Leclerc are kind of going clear a bit, despite Mercedes winning races still to this day in this season. It's a day to forget for sure for the Silvaras today, as they went from 2 cars in the podium positions to no points. For us, it's a tough one to take. Lando scored a lot of good points from McLaren, and they're now only 2 points behind us in the Constructors. So it is game on, it's pressure on from McLaren, and that is a statement that they are trying. They're trying their best, and they're coming at us now. That's probably the biggest amount of points they've got on us in this entire season to close up the P7 and the Constructors. So from next episode, it really is going to, we're going to feel the pressure, I think, from the Papaya team. But guys, if you have enjoyed that one, hit the like button. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. And you're around here, then do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. What could have been if it wasn't for that pit stop on the second one? But it is how it is in Formula 1. Until the next one, guys, hope you enjoy your day. Goodbye.